is going to pay attention to this, speaking to lawmakers?
Well, speaking to lawmakers?
Lawmakers, policymakers, I mean, you know, none of us in this room has a vote.
Right.
Other than at the booth.
Okay.
We don't have a vote tomorrow.
Fair enough. It's been reported statewide that this year's budget is $33.2 billion. That sounds like less than last year's budget, $33.5 billion. But this year's budget, as it currently stands, is $33.2 billion plus another $1.1 billion in bills. Common sense accounting says that that's a $34.3 billion budget. That's an increase. That's contrary to the press releases, tweets, radio broadcasts, and press releases of every lawmaker in this building that's staking their reputation to this budget. This budget is bigger than last year's budget, barring additional policy change.
Did you check to see how much gimmicks, like not like this one because they didn't, because they were under the pressure of the 30 days federal, but did you check to see how many gimmicks were in the 33.5?
Yes. Yes. No, I'm not saying there are no gimmicks. I'm saying we haven't backtracked on any of the other gimmicks that are out there. There's no gimmick elimination plan in this budget.
Were there gimmicks, though, in the 33.5?
Under appropriating to the state employee group insurance program was a gimmick that was there, and that's present again this year. They have not changed the billing period. I believe that's the overall number that they decided to spend. I don't know how much they say they saved last year. I think it was in the neighborhood of $200 or $300 million. That's present in this budget as well. So you can say both last year and this year are actually bigger than the figures that we were talking about. But this new gimmick makes this year's budget, compared apples to last year, 34.3 compared to 33.5.
No other gimmick other than health care last year, and you're saying that those numbers are the same this year and last year.
There's plenty of other gimmicks that have been out there before. That the state employee group health insurance one was one of the biggest used last year.
What did they do last year?
I believe they underappropriated by about $300 million. And they left the billing cycle in place this year, but appropriated for the full 12-month amount. Nonetheless, that's covering the extra period from last year and the amount needed to cover the full cost of this year. Some of that's pushed off till next year as well. So it's not like they're making up ground.
You've gone through all the gimmicks, the short change.
Every one that we've seen.
And so that's how you figure everything that you've seen.
We believe an apples-to-apples comparison makes this an $800 million increase over last year.
The line that we're getting, when we got this all spring, was that for the first time they're actually paying the pension payments. They're paying some of these bills in the FY12 plan that they just left linger in the past. So there is going to be some extra spending, but it's not a growth in new programs. That there were real cuts overall. Some of the numbers may look different, but there was a lot that was actually cut in spending for programs. Is that held up, or are you just taking a look at the big picture price tags and saying X, Y, Z equals this?
Well, you won't find anybody in Illinois who talks more about the crowd-out effect of our pension system. Make no doubt about it. The growing costs within the budget related to public employee pensions and retiree health care are going to continue to squeeze other areas. But lawmakers understood that it was important to have a budget that spent less overall than last year, and that's why they are advertising a $33.2 billion budget. But this is not a $33.2 billion budget. This is a spending increase.
Do you believe the revenue estimates that were used to base this budget on?
Are you referring to the House revenue estimates?
They said we're going to spend 33.2 because that's the revenue estimate.
Okay.
We're going to go. We think Illinois is going to get 33.2 this year, so we're going to spend 33.2.
The Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability has assumed that Illinois is going to take in about $34.3 billion this year. That estimate came out, of course, before we saw unemployment rates climb last month. Most folks thought that we were going to see unemployment continue to fall. We are in uncertain economic times. Our real costs equal our real dollar in the door, and if 34.3 in, 34.3 out means you retire almost no debt during the coming fiscal year, which is contrary to what was promised when this tax increase was passed.
What does your plan do regarding the time frame for paying the state's backlog of bills? I mean, right now they're essentially borrowing from vendors. I mean, you proposing keep doing that?
That's right. No, I'm not proposing keep doing that. Look, we were very clearly on the record opposing a tax increase in the middle of a recession. Our budget plan that we put out, we think would have been sustainable without a tax increase. Alas, taxes were increased, but we're not adjusting our recommended spending upwards in order to adjust for that. This takes revenues under current law. They go up and they sunset. If you take, for example, our plan, you would very soon see a cumulative surplus and eventually a record surplus that would open the door towards tax relief.
But what about catching up on the bills that we owe, the payments that we owe the vendors and the people who do business with the state? I mean, right now, there's.
We recommend that Illinois spend about $27.6 billion next year. If they take in $34.3 billion, you can quickly retire a lot of unpaid bills. Again, we oppose that tax increase in the first place, but if you're going to do anything with that cash, use it to pay down past due debt, not to maintain an otherwise unsustainable state budget.
The 10 things in here, urban fishing, state fairs, tourism, it's a couple of million, couple of hundred, certainly not $7 billion, $5 billion of cuts. How do you get from 33, 34 down to 27, with plans like that?
Sure. Well, you can't get down to 27.6 without starting out on projects like Lois Lane statues and urban fishing programs. All right. Second of all, let's talk first about how to make this a real spending reduction this year, ideas that are out here. Lawmakers are coming to town tomorrow. A number of them have had proposals in legislation. The legislature has in front of it a report showing them how to save $300 million a year on state retiree health care costs. The governor had a proposal at the beginning of the year to lower reimbursement rates to Medicaid providers. It would save $500 million. House Republican Working Group led by Patty Bellock believes that they have proposals that would lead to another $500 million in savings within Medicaid alone. Statutory transfers out, a lot of them going to local government distributive fund. That was a controversial topic this year, but even a 10% haircut to the local government distributive fund would save $100 million. These are ways to get to a net spending reduction this year. If you want to see our more detailed estimates, Ben, on how to get down to 27.6, it's in Budget Solutions 2012.
What kind of standing do you think these findings and your organization have with the lawmakers?
Well, again, I'll put it this way. It's important that there be consensus that this is a $34.3 billion budget. That is an uncomfortable fact for people who want to insist that we're only going to spend $33.2 billion this year. Policy needs to accompany this budget, policy that's going to lead to budget reductions. It's a mathematical fact. Those looking to stake their reputations on the fact that they are going to reduce overall spending this year have to receive this as fact, because the state's balance sheet will reflect it in time.
Is Illinois ever going to be able to get off this pushing $1 billion in the lapse period? Are we ever going to get to the point where lapse period spending is not going to need to be extended all the way till December? Or now that we have started down this road, is it too late to turn back?
I'm sure there are people that hope that we can keep these gimmicks up forever, Ben. But the fact is they cost taxpayer money regardless of how much we're saying that we're appropriating. Illinois cannot stay on the path of spending what it's actually spending forever. That's the path that we're on. It's one where either we have a permanent increase of record or permanent extension of record increases to state taxes, you may perhaps even further taxes, and we remain 48th in job creation. That's unsustainable. That's unacceptable. But that's what you get if you continue with these budget gimmicks.
Do you think the budget will grow 3% that they're planning for between 12 and 13? Planning for 3% growth?
History seems to suggest that they'll grow it by at least 3% per year, which again is...
Not spending, but revenues.
3% seems to be a reasonable estimate. To expect more than that would be unreasonable. However, given recent data on unemployment and other economic indicators, it would make sense to budget for less.
Your plan grows 3% a year?
It just again assumes that spending and revenue grow at 3% per year. We would recommend our plan, which is spelled out in what we call the Pension Funding and Fairness Act, says that state spending should only grow at inflation plus population. But for our purposes today, we've assumed that would be 3%.
Last question I have, 27.5. When was the last time the state actually spent that?
spent $27.6 billion. In today's terms, $27.6 billion, I believe we were there in the 80s.